The weight of the necklace Alex gave me felt heavier than it should, not because of the object itself, but because of everything it symbolized. After his explanation, I should have felt relieved, ecstatic even. He was planning to propose what? Girl wouldn't be over the moon. But instead of pure joy, there was a knot in my stomach I couldn't untangle. Maybe it was the guilt of doubting him. Or maybe it was something else. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. I told myself I needed time to process everything, to shake off the lingering suspicion that had built up over weeks of imagining worst-case scenarios. Alex noticed my uneasy always-notice spot. He chalked it up to me being overwhelmed by the surprise. "You're quiet," he said one night over dinner, his fork poised mid-air. "Are you sure you're okay? If you're not ready for all this, just tell me. I won't be mad." His words were earnest, and his eyes held that familiar sincerity that had made me fall for him in the first place. I wanted to reach across the table, take his hand, and tell him everything was fine. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. "It's not that," I lied. There's been a lot going on at work. My head's been all over the place." He nodded, satisfied with my excuse, but I could see a flicker of doubt in his expression. Alex wasn't the type to push, though, and for that, I was grateful. I needed space, and he gave it to me without question. But space didn't fix anything. A week later, I found myself walking aimlessly through the park near our apartment, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The autumn leaves crunched beneath my boots as I tried to make sense of the turmoil in my head. Why couldn't I just be happy? Why did I feel like something was missing, even when Alex was doing everything right? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the man sitting on the bench until I was practically next to him. He was sketching something in a small notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him: dark hair, sharp features, a leather jacket that looked like it had seen better days, but something about him caught my attention. He looked up and caught me staring. "Can I help you?" asked, his tone amused. "Sorry," I stammered, feeling my cheeks flush. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he interrupted, closing his notebook with a snap. "You just looked like you were about to walk into a tree. Thought I should intervene." I glanced behind me, realizing I had been dangerously close to doing exactly that. "Thanks, I guess." He smirked, leaning back on the bench. "Rough day?" I hesitated, unsure why I felt compelled to answer. "Something like that. Well, if you ever need unsolicited advice from a stranger, I'm here for you." His sarcasm caught me off guard, and despite myself, I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in days. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, starting to walk away. "Hey," he called after me. "What's your name?" I paused, turning back to face him. "Emma, yours?" "Ryan," he said, flashing me a grin. That was equal parts charming and infuriating. "Nice to meet you, Emma. Don't walk into any more trees." I rolled my eyes and kept walking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan's sudden appearance in my life was going to complicate things. I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan. Not in a romantic way, at least. That's what I told myself, but in a curious, nagging way. Something about his sarcasm, the effortless way he deflected seriousness, stayed with me. It was such a stark contrast to Alex's earnestness. Alex, who tried so hard to do everything right to make me happy. While I floundered under the weight of my own indecision, I told myself it was harmless. Ryan was just some random guy I'd bumped into during a bad day. It wasn't like I'd see him again. But Fedor, something equally irritating, had other plans. The next time I saw him, it was at a coffee shop I rarely visited, one tucked into a quiet corner of downtown. I'd gone there to work on a project for my job, desperate for a change of scenery. I was halfway through writing an email when I heard his voice. "You're blocking the cream and sugar." I looked up, startled. There he was, the same leather jacket, the same infuriating smirk. "Ryan," I said, more surprised than anything else. He cocked his head. "You remembered my name. I'm flattered." I rolled my eyes, stepping aside so he could fix his coffee. "What are you doing here?" "Getting coffee," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Do you follow all strangers you meet in parks, or am I just lucky?" He grinned. "You're definitely lucky." I groaned, but I couldn't help the small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. He had this way of disarming me, like he wasn't taking anything seriously. And maybe I shouldn't either. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, motioning to the empty seat at my table. I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse about needing to focus on work or that I was meeting someone. But instead, I shrugged. "Sure." He slid into the chair across from me, his presence somehow filling the small space between us. I watched as he took out the same notebook he'd had in the park and began sketching. "Do you always draw people in parks and coffee shops?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Only the interesting ones," he replied without looking up. "Should I be flattered or offended? Up to you." I laughed, shaking my head. It felt so easy, sitting there with him, like we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. And that scared me. As the minutes ticked by, our conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me he was a freelance illustrator, picking up gigs here and there while working on a graphic novel he'd been writing for years. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing bits and pieces of my life, my doubts about work, even my confusion about my relationship with Alex, though I didn't name him. "So, let me get this straight," Ryan said, leaning back in his chair. "You're with a guy who seems perfect on paper, but something doesn't feel right, and you can't figure out if it's him or you." "Pretty much," I admitted, fiddling with the lid of my coffee cup. He studied me for a moment, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "You ever think that maybe you're not supposed to figure it out? That maybe some things just are?" His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to dismiss him, to brush off his comment as more of his usual sarcasm, but I couldn't. "That sounds like a cop-out," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe," he said, his smirk returning. "Or maybe it's just the truth." We parted ways after that, with him leaving a half-finished sketch on the table, and me feeling more conflicted than ever. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between what I knew was right and what I couldn't stop thinking about. On the surface, everything with Alex remained the same. He was warm, thoughtful, and undeniably devoted. But it felt like I was watching our relationship through a pane of glass. I was there, but not really there. And then there was Ryan. I didn't go looking for him, not exactly, but somehow he kept appearing. At first, it seemed like coincidence, another run-in at the coffee shop, a quick hello in the park. But then, I started to wonder if I was unconsciously steering myself toward places where I might see him. I wasn't proud of it, but there was something about him, about the way he listened without judgment, that felt addictive. One afternoon, Alex surprised me at work with lunch. He brought my favorite salad and even remembered to add the extra dressing I always asked for. "I thought you could use a little break," he said. Setting the bag down on my desk with a smile, I forced a smile back, hating myself for how mechanical it felt. "Thanks. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "But I wanted to." As he left, I stared at the bag of food, guilt churning in my stomach. Here was a man who loved me, who went out of his way to make me happy, and I couldn't stop thinking about someone else. Someone I barely knew. Later that week, I saw Ryan again. I was at the park, pretending to read a book while secretly hoping he'd show up. And he did. "Emma," he said, as if he'd been expecting me. "Ryan," I replied, trying to sound casual. He dropped onto the bench beside me, his notebook already in hand. "You come here a lot, huh? I could say the same about you." He grinned. For a while, we sat in comfortable silence. I could feel the questions bubbling under the surface, but I wasn't ready to voice them. It was Ryan who broke the quiet. "How's perfect on paper, guy?" I frowned, unsure why the question irritated me. "His name is Alex, and he's fine. Just fine." Ryan asked, his tone teasing, but his eyes sharp. "Why do you care?" I shot back, surprising even myself with the edge in my voice. He leaned back, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "I don't, really. I just think it's interesting. You keep showing up here, talking to me, but you've got this perfect guy waiting for you at home. Makes me wonder what you're looking for." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I was looking for. Ryan must have sensed my hesitation because his expression softened. Look, I'm not judging you. I get it. Life's messy. That's an understatement, I muttered. He laughed, a low, easy sound that made my chest tighten. Messy's where the good stuff happens, though. You ever think maybe you're just afraid to admit what you really want? His words hit a nerve, and I stood up abruptly. I should go. Ryan looked up at me, his expression unreadable. See you around, Emma? Back home, Alex was cooking dinner, the smell of garlic and rosemary filling the air. He greeted me with a kiss, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. How was your day? He asked, handing me a glass of wine. Good, I lied, taking a sip and avoiding his eyes as we ate. He told me about his plans for the weekend, a hike he'd been wanting to try, a new restaurant he thought I'd like. He was building a future for us, laying it out piece by piece. And all I could think about was how wrong it felt. After dinner, I excused myself to take a shower. As the water poured over me, I pressed my forehead against the cool tile, trying to drown out the sound of Ryan's voice in my head. What do you really want? I didn't know. And that scared me more than anything else. I told myself I wouldn't see Ryan again. It wasn't healthy, not for me, not for Alex, but some promises are easier to make than to keep. 2 days later, I found myself back at the park. I told Alex I needed a quiet place to work on some reports. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the real reason. I sat on the same bench, clutching a coffee I didn't want, trying to convince myself I was just here for the scenery. When Ryan appeared, I wasn't surprised. Part of me had been counting on it. You're consistent, he said as he approached, his notebook tucked under one arm. Don't flatter yourself, I replied, though my tone lacked conviction. He sat beside me without asking, flipping open his notebook and scribbling something without looking up. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Why do you always show up here? Why do you? He shot back, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. I didn't have an answer, and he knew it. Relax, Emma, he said, his voice softer than usual. I'm not here to psychoanalyze you. Good, I muttered, because I'm tired of overthinking everything. He chuckled, closing his notebook and leaning back on the bench. Maybe that's your problem. You think too much? Ever just do what feels right. His words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. Ryan, before I could finish, my phone buzzed in my bag, breaking the moment. I pulled it out and saw Alex's name on the screen. I should take this, I said, standing up. Of course, Ryan said, his tone unreadable. I stepped away, answering the call. Hey, Alex. Hey, he said, his voice warm as always. I was just checking in. You've been working so hard lately. I thought maybe we could grab dinner tonight. My treat. I glanced back at Ryan, who was still sitting on the bench, sketching like nothing had happened. Guilt twisted in my stomach. Sure, I said quickly. Dinner sounds great. Great. I'll see you at home, Alex said, his tone lighting up. When I hung up, I turned back to Ryan. He was watching me, his expression impossible to read. Boyfriend? He asked casually, though there was an edge to his voice. I corrected the word, tasting foreign in my mouth. Right? He nodded, his smirk returning, but it didn't reach his eyes. You should probably get back to him. Then, Ryan, Emma, he interrupted, standing up. He was taller than I'd realized, and for the first time, there was something serious in his gaze. It's okay. Really? You don't owe me anything. I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out. He gave me one last look, a mix of understanding and something else, something I couldn't quite name before walking away at dinner that night. Alex was everything I should have wanted. He was attentive, thoughtful, and completely focused on me, like he always was. He asked about my day, told me about a funny moment at work, and even brought up a vacation he thought we should plan for next summer. And yet, all I could think about was Ryan. Earth to Emma, Alex said, waving a hand in front of my face. You okay? Yeah, sorry, I said, forcing a smile. Just tired. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I know things have been stressful lately, but we'll get through it together. I nodded, but the lump in my throat made it hard to speak. That night, as Alex slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get so complicated. I loved Alex, I knew I did, but there was a part of me that couldn't. Stop thinking about Ryan, about the way he made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in years. What do you really want? Ryan's question echoed in my mind, louder than ever. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything came crashing down. I remember the exact moment, the smell of rain lingering in the air, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights in the office, and the weight of my phone vibrating on my desk with a message I wasn't ready for. It was from Ryan. Ryan, hey, I know this is probably a bad idea, but can we talk? I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. He hadn't reached out since the last time we saw each other at the park. Part of me had expected him to, but another part of me, the logical, grounded part, had hoped he wouldn't. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at the message like it was a bomb waiting to go off. Emma, you okay? My coworker Leela asked as she walked by my desk. Yeah, I said quickly, forcing a smile. Just a lot on my plate. She nodded, disappearing into the break room, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My finger hovered over the screen, debating whether to reply. Against my better judgment, I typed back, "Where?" His reply came almost instantly. "The coffee shop on Elm, 7 p.m. I knew I shouldn't go. I should have deleted the message, ignored the pull I felt toward him, and gone straight home to Alex. But instead, I found myself agreeing. When I walked into the coffee shop that evening, Ryan was already there, sitting at a corner table with his usual notebook in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said, standing up briefly before sitting back down. "Hi," I replied, sliding into the chair across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, charged with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted, his voice softer than usual. "I wasn't sure I would either," I said honestly. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know this is messy, and I'm probably the last person you should be talking to right now. But I can't stop thinking about you, Emma." His words hit me like a freight train, and I felt my throat tighten. "Ryan, just hear me out," he interrupted, leaning forward. "I don't know what this is or what it means, but I know there's something here. You feel it too, don't you?" I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding and my head was spinning. "I'm not trying to mess up your life," he continued, his voice low and urgent. "But I can't pretend like this doesn't mean anything. Can you?" His question hung in the air, daring me to answer. And in that moment, I realized I didn't know what to say. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen and saw Alex's name. Guilt flooded through me as I silenced the call. Ryan noticed, his jaw tightening. "That's him, isn't it?" "Ryan, this isn't fair," I said, my voice trembling. "Fair," he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You're the one who keeps coming back. You're the one who's here right now. If it's so unfair, then why are you still sitting across from me?" His words stung because they were true. I stood up abruptly, grabbing my bag. "I can't do this." "Emma," he called after me, but I didn't turn around. When I got home, Alex was waiting for me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in his hand and a hopeful smile on his face. "Hey," he said, setting the glass down and walking over to me. "How was your day?" "It was fine," I lied, brushing past him and heading for the bedroom. "Emma," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Talk to me. What's going on?" I froze, my back to him. For a moment, I thought about telling him everything about Ryan, about the confusion and guilt that had been eating away at me. But the words wouldn't come. "Nothing," I said finally, turning to face him with a forced smile. "I'm just tired." He studied me for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You've been saying that a lot lately. Work's been stressful," I said, using the same excuse I always did. Alex nodded, but the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. That night, as I lay in bed beside Alex, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Ryan's words echoed in my head, along with the question I'd been avoiding for weeks. What do you really want? The answer was still out of reach. But I knew one thing for certain. The cracks in my life were growing wider, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The storm finally came 2 weeks later, but not in the way I'd expected. Life has a funny way of unraveling when you're least prepared for it, and I was far from prepared for what happened next. It started with Alex. He'd been distant since. That night, I came home and brushed him off, but I'd convinced myself he was just giving me space. That's what Alex always did. He respected boundaries even when they weren't clear. But that morning, as I sat at the kitchen table scrolling aimlessly through emails, he walked in with a look I didn't recognize. "We need to talk," he said. His voice calm but firm. My stomach dropped. Those 4 words never led anywhere good. "Okay," I said carefully, setting my phone down. He sat across from me, his hands folded on the table. For a moment, he just looked at me like he was searching for something in my expression. "Are you happy?" he asked finally. The question caught me off guard. "What? Of course I am." "Why would you don't?" he interrupted, his tone sharper than not. I'd ever heard it. "Don't lie to me, Emma. I can feel it. You've been distant, distracted. You barely even look at me anymore." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died in my throat. He was right, and we both knew it. "I love you," I said instead, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you?" he asked, and the pain in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "Because I don't feel it anymore. I feel like I'm holding on to something that's already gone." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Alex, please, is there someone else?" he asked suddenly, his words cutting through the air like a knife. The room went silent, the weight of his question hanging between us. "No," I said quickly, but my voice cracked, betraying me. He closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. I knew it. "Not what you think," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "Nothing happened, I swear. I've been confused. About everything." "Confused," he repeated, the bitterness in his voice twisting the knife further. "That's a hell of a way to describe it. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you did," he said quietly, standing up. "And the worst part is, I don't even think you realize how much." He walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, broken and alone. That evening, I went to the park. I didn't know where else to go. The apartment felt suffocating, and I couldn't bear to face Alex again, not yet. When I saw Ryan, sitting on our usual bench, part of me wanted to turn around and leave. But something pulled me forward, like a moth to a flame. He looked up as I approached, his expression guarded. "Emma?" I sat down beside him, wiping at my tear-streaked face. "It's over," I said, my voice hollow. He didn't ask for details. He just nodded, as if he'd been expecting this. "How do you feel?" he asked, after a long silence. "I don't know," I admitted, relieved, terrified, like I'd just ruined the best thing I ever had. "Maybe it wasn't the best thing," he said, his voice gentle. I looked at him, searching for the answers I couldn't find on my own. "And what about you? What is this, Ryan? What are we?" He hesitated, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I don't want to let it go." His words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt like another weight pressing down on my chest. I thought being with Ryan would make everything clearer, but it only made the chaos louder. The days that followed were a blur. Alex moved out of the apartment, taking only the essentials. He didn't fight me on anything, he just left, like he'd been waiting for the moment to let go. The silence he left behind was deafening. Ryan tried to be there for me, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to feel whole, to feel like I'd made the right choice, but instead, I felt empty. Every time he smiled at me, every time he reached for my hand, I felt a pang of guilt I couldn't shake one night. As we sat in his tiny studio apartment, surrounded by his sketches and half-finished canvases, I finally broke. "I don't think I can do this," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I thought this was what I wanted," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But now, I don't even know who I am anymore." Ryan didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, watching me unravel. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think you've known all along," he said quietly. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, because deep down, I knew. He was right. I'd been chasing something: freedom, excitement, escape, but in the process, I'd lost myself. "I'm sorry," I whispered, standing up. Ryan didn't try to stop me as I walked out the door. In the weeks that followed, I started to pick up the pieces. I moved into a smaller apartment, started therapy, and focused on figuring out who I was without Alex or Ryan. It wasn't easy. And there were days when the loneliness felt unbearable. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally facing myself. One day, as I walked through the park, I passed the bench where it had all begun. For a moment, I stopped, staring at the spot where I'd met Ryan. The memories rushed back. Bittersweet and sharp, but this time, I didn't linger. I kept walking. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't letting go of someone else, since letting go of the person you thought you were supposed to be. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comment side. Love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.